today what I'd like to talk about is something that we think about a lot but don't have systematic ways to explore, and that is trust. So we know that trust establishes the foundation of basically every relationship. It's our belief in the reliability of someone or something, and it shapes what we think and determines how we behave. And though trust is important, many of us don't have clear, systematic ways to assess trust, and that's especially true when we work with teams. And so today, I'd like to share an approach to thinking about trust using two simple equations. But first, let's begin with a very simple exercise. Select a person next to you. Introduce yourself. You may know them, you may not. Shake their hand. Go ahead and do that. I'm watching. Now, look at them silently and thoughtfully and size them up. In your mind, assess their degree of trustworthiness. So, say on a scale of 1 to 10, assign a number that indicates how much trust you might put into that person. Go ahead and do it. So, but don't tell them. Now, if you think they're, say, moderately trustworthy, you might give them, say, a 5. And if you think that you would trust them with your newborn, give them a 10. And if you want to run from the building screaming, give them a 0. So keep this to yourself and ask yourself, why did you pick that number? How did you pick that number? So the feeling of trust, I believe, is the result of two simultaneous calculations. One is performed consciously and the other unconsciously. And the more we understand how we make our personal calculations of trust, the better we can use this amazing resource in us to make better decisions. So full disclosure, I am not a trust expert. It's not something I have a PhD in. I do study it, but in fact, I stumbled across this through necessity. So I work for a software company which develops high-end design and engineering tools, and our customers make anything from cars to buildings to infrastructure to visual effects for movies, and each of them tries to get an edge by innovating better. So a big part of my work is to help teams innovate better, and we do this by something called tackling wicked problems. And I'm sure you've seen this kind of work. We start off with questions about business. How do you grow? How do you compete better? How do you become more efficient? And people draw out their ideas using sticky notes, and they put them onto wall charts, and we make conversations quite visible. And after the core business questions are clarified, teams kind of shift to other sets of questions, and those typically land on how do we work better, how do we work more effectively, and most importantly, how do we foster trust within our teams? So think about it for a moment. How would you define trust? If you're going to explain trust to a team in a sentence or two, a team that you work with, what would you say? Well, the dictionary tells us that trust is the firm belief in the reliability, the truth, the ability or strength of something or someone. And that kind of feels right, but in my experience, teams are way more effective when they formulate answers themselves, and that's where design thinking comes in. And we do this by taking 3 bold steps, groups through these steps. We build a shared understanding, we shape options or alternatives, and then we make smart choices. So when thinking about trust, we start with the obvious question, what is trust? And then using sticky notes, participants write down their important qualities, 1 idea per note, and they put them up on a wall, and this gives everyone a chance to see everyone else's ideas. And there are surprises, and there are often 2 dozen or 3 dozen different definitions or qualities of trust, and there's really not a lot of agreement. That's pretty common. But something interesting happens when people cluster their ideas together. When the group brings them together, simple patterns emerge, and this always happens. By the way, if you do this kind of work, do it in silence. It's amazing. People working in silence are far more effective than when they talk together. And most groups find 4 or 5 categories of trust that they can agree on. Now, I've done this many, many times, and I think my favorite pattern emerged from a large visual effects company just north of you. And they came up with a pattern and an equation that looks like this. T equals CCC over R. So what do you think they stand for? Well, the first C stands for capability. Are you able to do what you claim you can do? Do you have the skill or the resources? And the second is character. Are you true to your word? Will you follow up and do what you say you're going to do? The third is caring? How important is the sense of well-being of others? Do you put your attention to others? So these three characteristics, you can see how they work together and interrelate to create trust. So increase any one of the C's and T goes up. Decrease any one of the C's and T goes down. And by the way, this actually works with teenagers. It works with friends and colleagues. It's a really interesting way to check in. And it's all over, the three C's are all over R, which stands for risk. The higher the risk of a situation, the higher the C's need to be in order to establish trust. There's this threshold inside of us that someone is trustworthy or not trustworthy. So this simple equation unpacks trust into a few easy to identify and measure qualities. It takes something that is often kind of gnarled together, I trust them, I don't trust them, and gives us a kind of pattern or way to understand what's at play, what's the mechanism. So for teams looking to work better, whether they make cars or movies or visual effects, or any team collaborating on any project, developing a simple definition of trust gives them a simple, memorable framework to assess the future behavior of people. And so not everyone's equation of trust is exactly the same. Some people put consistency higher, others put rapid response higher, others put caring much higher. So it all depends. So people use these equations to improve the performance of their teams in many ways. So one of my favorites is actually literally putting up every team member's T equation or T number up onto the wall. And quite literally, you score them, and the people score themselves. And what's amazing is that the trust scores often determine where an organization is working really well and where it's not working well. And one facilitation I did not so long ago, it was pretty amazing. The quality assurance of the organization was really kind of broken, and it turns out that the trust level of that person who ran QA was very low. And the value of splitting it up into CCC over R is that they could reflect on why exactly that was the case and actually externalize a conversation that would be otherwise quite tough, quite contentious. So intuitively, it makes sense. We can break trust down into a number of different parts. But, it's kind of incomplete. There's something that's missing here. And so in the many years of facilitating, often I see what people say and what they do can differ pretty extensively. Now, to understand this, we look to the work of Daniel Kahneman, who many of you, I'm sure, have heard of. He's a Nobel laureate who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And based on decades of research, he concluded that thinking can be classified into two broad types. Type 1 thinking is fast, it's automatic, it's emotional, and happens below the threshold of awareness. And if you look at this equation, 3 times 4, you can solve it very quickly. That's type 1 thinking. Type 2 thinking is slow, it requires effort, it's strung together by logic, and it requires conscious intention, and we're aware at every step. So solving this equation is something that most people can't do in their heads automatically. So our brain uses both types of thinking as well as the circumstances demand. So each operates with a different set of rules and a different kind of calculations. Now, we tend to use type 1 thinking a lot more than type 2. And why? Because it's easier, it's simpler, it's faster, and it's automatic. But in many situations, when we need to assess trust, whether we give or don't give trust, we need to go into type 2 thinking. So when we look at photographs of well-known people, we can see type 1 trust kicking in. Famous Canadian politician, a well-known logo for an organization, a well-known pets, puppies. So the same is true of buildings and institutions and governments and political parties. So there's another kind of trust that follows a different kind of equation that we also need to tackle. And in wicked problem solving, as usual, we begin with questions, but if we start with a different question, how do you sense trust? You get a different kind of answer. Sticky notes, people put them up onto the wall, and you see a wide range of ideas that, again, don't seem to fit together. But when sorted, usually two categories emerge. Some organizations a lot more, but usually they can be broken down into two that I like to call the two S's of type 1 trust. So they boil down to two immediate calculations. One is called story, and the other is called stance. So story represents the immediate at your fingertip beliefs about a person's story, their background, your memory of them, and most importantly, their intention, what they're really trying to do. And it really sums up what you feel about them. And Daniel Kahneman, his research says that these beliefs are formed through something called heuristics, or mental shortcuts. And we use these heuristics to form stories, and there's a ton of them. There's anchoring, there's framing, and so on. The one that I'd really like to talk about that is immediately practical is the impression of stance. So stance is physical presence, but more than that. And to really understand this, we look to the research of MIT researcher Sandy Pentland. So Sandy spent a lifetime researching how people interact, and he uses these amazing devices called sociometers. They're these little pendants that you can wear that track people's physical actions. And he's measured everything from speed dating to pitches to team collaboration, and he's concluded that physical actions really provide remarkable signals on how trust is communicated. So stance is the word that I use to sum up four qualities. So the first one is physical posture or body position. So you know this. When two or more people adopt this similar posture, they are kind of saying something to each other non-verbally and in a visceral way. Their bearing actually matches their attitude. And you can see this in businesses, in cocktail parties, and of course in meetings. The second is head movement or head bobbing. And I see some people there. What is it? It's an involuntary sign of agreement. And when people do this, they're exchanging signals that build trust and multiply trust. And again, you can see this in many places. A third is the right amount of eye contact. So not too much, which is kind of weird, or too little off to the side, which of course is kind of weird. So we need this connection that holds people, well, frankly, in regard. You're holding them. And the fourth signal is matching tones of voice. So often, high status or more confident people have lyrical voices. They're more free and more fluid tones. And people in a lower social context or status or power in a certain situation, their voices tend to be thin and flat and fixed. So successful social interactions lead to a syncopation of tones of voice. In other words, people find rhythm. They find rhythm with their body, their tone of voice, with their eye movements. And so these four signals they're not causes of trust, but they're signs that people are trusting each other. So type 1 trust has a different kind of equation. So how do you use this? It's surprising, but you can kind of hack trust, not for the purpose of making it inauthentic, but to understand what are the levers that you have. So now I'd like you to look at your partner again. Go ahead and look at your partner. And what I'd like you to do now is change something about yourself, your physical movement. You might want to say something to them, your posture, and lower your trust by 2 or 3. What would you do to lower your trust? I can see you. And what would you do to increase your trust? Change posture, change movement. It's amazing. And again, we do this training. So, it seems strange, but often the most powerful of the group exercises we do to help build team effectiveness and to solve their wicked problems involves hacking trust. Not faking it, but understanding the real signals that are taking place between. And I've done workshops 10, 15 years ago where people are hacking trust and they remember. They go, Tom, that was incredible. I still remember when we did that and how useful a tool it was for me to really understand the issue that I had with a colleague. So these are two types of thinking, fast and slow. And there are two types of equations for building trust. One is fast and one is slow, and each serves its own purpose and its own circumstance. So trust can be summarized, the type 1 trust is fast, it's calculated immediately, subconsciously through stance and through story. The tone of voice, and it is what we tend to immediately use for trust, for judging the worthiness of a person or their reliability. Type 2, when it gets really important that you need to know whether that person is trustworthy or not, it's slow, it requires effort, and we bring together these 3 C's and an R to assess the trustworthiness of people. You know, I like to think it's kind of like we have 2 operating systems running in our brain, and they tend not to work together at the same time. We tend to use type 1 more of the time, and it works most of the time, but we can benefit from kicking into type 2 when decisions are really important. Parallel operating systems working together. So what are the lessons here? Well, I think the lessons are we need to identify when we need to use different kinds of trust. And there's 2 kinds of exercises that we use, again, in our wicked problem solving to help people foster trust. And the first is build trust boards. We don't call them that. We call them agile boards, which are boards that actually map out the team's commitment to themselves and their flow of work. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen those, easy to look up, agile boards, and they're incredibly powerful ways for teams to improve their effectiveness because we get to see caring capability and character all lined up all across risk. And another one which is super dangerous. Don't do this unless you feel that there is a really high degree of trust. But it's amazing. And what it is when you have an organization, a team that is really exploring and kind of understanding what's working, what's not working, you put everyone's name up with sticky notes, and everyone has 4 markers, and they can draw a line only from themselves to someone else that indicates the quality of communication, or in some cases, the quality of trust. Purple is you fill in each other's sentences. Green is great. Yellow is not so good. Red is uh-oh. And then no line means that there's no communication or trust whatsoever. And in the course of just a few minutes, a team can show a snapshot of their inner dynamic. It can take 2 months of consulting work and parboil it down into 10 minutes. And then you can have the real, powerful, important conversations that determine whether or not you're going to work effectively and happily, and if you're all in. So trust is the foundation of relationship. It's a kind of social currency. It's our faith in the capacity and the character and how we work. So each of us have 2 equations for trust. We all trust fast and slow, and getting to really know this in ourselves dramatically improves our trust in our trust. And with that, thank you.